Welcome everybody. This is our President's virtual visit with the North West and Yorkshire Young Planners. My name is Olivia Pemberton. I am a senior planner at Savills and I am the chair of the North West Young Planners. I'm here with three members of my committee, Amy, Tom and Jen. Tom and Jen will be speaking for you today, and also I think the remainder of our committee are watching. So just for an introduction to us, there's 9 of us in total. We've got 6 private sector planners, 2 students and 1 public sector planner. And we're really grateful to have you here today, Sue. We hope you find our presentations interesting, and I'll hand you over to James to give an introduction to the Yorkshire Young Planners Committee.
Thank you. So I'm James Forrest. I'm the Vice Chair of the Yorkshire Young Planners Committee, and today we've got two speakers. So we've got Rachael Wade and from Arup and Emma Bilton from Quod. So thank you for joining us today for speaking. And we've got a couple of guests as well in the audience who will be listening on. So again, thank you for joining. If I pass you on now to Amy, who will introduce the theme of the presentation.
Yep, that sounds good. So yeah, so 2020 has been a year. Oh, there we go. 2020 has been a year of distinctive change for the North West and Yorkshire, as well as the rest of the country. The response to the pandemic has resulted in social, economic, and environmental trend shifts, emphasising pre-existing challenges, and in some cases exposing new ones for the built environment. That said, the impact of the pandemic has also delivered and accelerated new exciting opportunities for positive radical change to take place for the better good of our built environment. Reflecting on 2020 events, our presentation, The Adaptation of Our Towns and Cities for the New Normal, focuses on the importance of lessons learned, including shifts in priorities and patterns, the complexities of flexibility, and the new modern approaches essential to improve and successfully secure the future of our towns and cities through an ever-evolving planning system. As Vice Chair of the North West Young Planners Committee, I'm delighted to hand over to our first presenter, Jen McWilliam, and her presentations on staying local, the winners and losers. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Jennifer. The winners and losers, looking at cities and town centres. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So as we're all aware, urban life has changed dramatically over time, not just before COVID-19, but also before and after. So what does this mean for our cities and the people living and working in them? As you'll see on this slide, are just a few examples of how they've been affected, from retail jobs being lost in hospitality, businesses, the death of the office, we're all working from home. And people are also seeing cities as a hotspot for COVID-19, as we can recently see with Mersey. We're also seeing a lot of young people might continue to move to cities for their career and socialise. There's also a lack of green space. We need more affordable housing. So can we just move on to the next slide? Now, so just looking at slide 1 and now moving into slide 2, we need to understand what cities and town centres can offer. So town centres are, the housing tends to be more affordable, the community feel, and it's independent. Cities tend to be more diverse, it tends to be more of an experience where you can have a whole day, whether it's going for spa, afternoon tea, or a drink. There's a mix of what you can do. But also including it, it's not just cities and it's not just town centres, we've also got to look at local centres. As with Wigan, where I live, it's not just Wigan town centre, you've got many like Ashton, Atherton, and they all play a huge part. Looking at the local centres, they're a more diverse community. People are at the centre of what we do. Local people are paying into the local economy. We're also bringing people together, and there are new ways of working and living. So if you can just go to slide 3, please. So after we've spoken about cities and town centres, we need to understand what they offer, but we need to be careful that we're not getting stuck in a cycle. And when I talk about a cycle, it's looking at how town centres are getting into a rut of they need more magnetism, they need that unique experience, they need to offer more than a retail. Cities need a more local and suburban feel, there's less individuality, it's more about blending in, and we've also spoken about death of the office. So something I'd like to propose is, now more than ever, the recent pandemic has shown us that we all need to work together and combine ideas. So it's looking at how cities and town centres can work together to move forward and diversify the offer that they can both present. So is there a way that we need to distinguish between what a city can offer and what a town centre can offer? Do cities remain hosting high-level services and anchor institutions that attract investment and people? And do town centres remain a hub for the local community? Can we just move to slide 4, please? So after what I was saying about getting stuck in a cycle, we need to break that cycle and find a different way that what cities and town centres can offer. As I said at the very beginning of the presentation, I spoke about who the winner and the losers would be, and I'll say a bit later on, it's not a very clear answer to be like cities are the winners or losers, but in my own opinion, it's the local centres who have been the local hero, whether it's before the pandemic and we've seen even more after the pandemic. Local centres have thrived and they've taken change as an opportunity. They found new ways of working. We've seen communities come together. People are travelling out less to cities and focusing more on what the individual centre can offer. Local people, as I said before, are paying into the local economy, which is one of the most important things. It's about putting people back at the centre of our cities, town centres and local centres. So we can just move to slide 5, please. Thank you. So I've kind of done a bit of a whistle-stop tour of cities versus town centres, but it's whether we need to stop looking at them as versus and being opposites of each other. We've got local centres in the middle of the two, and as I've said, we need to look at what local centres can teach our cities and town centres. What do we need to do? And this is what slide 5 is all about. We need to look at localism. There's a massive shift. We need to have a massive shift in power away from central government to local communities and a renewed focus on localism. Local people must be empowered to redesign their own high streets and have a say on the businesses, services and amenities that occupy it, because at the end of the day, it's them using it, not the people that are trying to bring all this together. We also need leadership. It's important that candidates for leadership roles should be selected for having a broad range of dynamic and collaborative skills to get the best out of their communities. So we need localism, leadership and embrace change. But also, both cities and town centres need to bring in more green space. We need an established residential offer within the centres where people will be going to live and can go for breakfast, go back to their apartment, go back out for lunch, and it's all done in one place. We need to put together transformation plans that are clear and in plain English and have the opinion of the people using the services. We need to move away from blind consumerism, and also develop a community value charter. More importantly, as what we're doing as well, we need to get young people involved in planning the high streets and also get them involved in town centre regeneration. And we need to encourage more people to live in well-connected suburbs. Going back to local centres, what we can take for them is that we must embrace change. We need to be more careful how we manage temporary interventions and temporary urbanism. As we've seen, especially in McWilliam, we've seen pop-up shops and pop-up art centres which is showing how we can use empty spaces and derelict buildings and develop a new way of working. But we're in danger of temporary intervention or simply interim strategies, and we're making them do until the market conditions return. Manchester Metropolitan University referred to in a report multifunctional towns and cities, and this is what we need. They need to offer a much more diverse offer. We also need to capture the creativity of local centres and plan how to take this forward. And as I said before, I presented a few ideas of how we can do this through bringing together more green space, like in local centres. There's parks, there's different places that people can sit and be together. We need to establish that living offer as well. So just bringing all together what I've said, we need to understand what both cities and towns can offer, and that is sociability. And that is something you can't get online and you can't get working at home on your own. We need to bring this back into focus and get the people to remember, therefore, that they come into towns in the first place for socialising. We need to understand what stakeholders want out of cities and out of town centres and work from there. We need to develop a framework, and we need to understand, more importantly, the personalities of each places. What is special about your city and what is special about your town? Is it a holiday town, convenience, or a community centre? And I think this is where local centres can play a big part in helping both town centres and cities develop a new way of being and surviving. I'd also like to propose that neighbouring local authorities need to partner up together to share good practice, lessons learned, rather than trying to outdo one another. Or more so, work with the local communities or local centres to see how they have thrived during the pandemic and also before. And we need to remember that none of this is new. The pandemic has only accelerated trends. Thank you. That's me done.
Thank you again for your time, Sue, and welcome to my presentation on reimagining space during pandemic. And thanks, Jen, for a good presentation earlier. Next slide, please. The presentation will focus on three key themes with discussions on spatial implications of these changing spaces. Next slide, please. During the recent restrictions, many people benefited from good access to private spaces such as gardens, while others, including myself, relied on public spaces such as parks for exercise. A recent Rightmove study from early this year has found that houses and bungalows are now becoming the most sought after properties being inquired about, with all types of flats dropping out of favour. Desire for more space, bigger garden, and even a spare room for a home office has led to flats falling out of fashion with buyers and renters. We must not forget the requirement for public space. A study by the University of Sheffield conducted pre-pandemic in 2019 found that while accessibility to green space for young children favours those in lower income areas, the total area provided is less and there is greater potential for overcrowding. So there's implications relating to the quality, but obviously with overcrowding, you've got social distancing issues as well. I think we've seen through the pandemic the reclamation of public space. It's not new as itself, but again, going on theme, is accelerated during the pandemic. This has largely benefited the following users of space, largely pedestrians and cyclists, such as the pedestrianisation of Deansgate in the picture, and particularly for hospitality and the promotion of alfresco culture in our towns and cities across the UK. Next slide, please. Flexible spaces, well, in this context, I'm referring to whole or part of buildings with flexible planning permissions, and they may then have flexible leases. So in theory, spaces with flexible planning permissions and their leases should be the optimum at the moment. Spaces such as the food hall in Amsterdam, which is pictured, can act as an event space for private functions and business meetings, but then have the food and drink offering late into the evening. However, Jones Lang LaSalle in a recent report found that 30% of all office space will be consumed by 2030. So these will be spaces where many of the workers will be working from home, and coming in intermittently, or they'll be co-working. So surely this will be a boom time for co-working spaces. Not according to Jones Lang LaSalle. They note that a pure co-working operating model will likely suffer because of COVID-19, as startups are likely to work from home and the larger companies will share their memberships. With so many of our spaces becoming increasingly concentrated towards this model of co-working, particularly in London and Manchester, this could really have a major impact in the way that our city centres will function in the future. It would appear that smaller satellite offices, which will be able to reduce commute times and dependency on public transport, are more likely to spring up, according to Jones Lang LaSalle. As planners, we need to consider the space to adapt to the current climate and the optimum of that type of space, but the market may not be able to deliver just yet. Investors need confidence that their investment rate returns, and a hyper-flexible space that us planners might want may not be practical. Next slide, please. This ties in nicely with the use class order. So you'll probably be aware of the recent changes to the use class, and I'll be focusing on Class E, which provides this new commercial business and service class. The intention is to provide flexibility for buildings to adapt and suit changing requirements and trends. However, there's some recent analysis from Landmark Chambers which would suggest that potential future tension with the NPPF. The NPPF requires a local plan to be prepared in context of objectively assessed needs, which is also one of the tests of soundness. It is noted at this point the government are considering looking to remove soundness as a test for plan making in the white paper. But finally, in terms of the use class order, it could be a false sense of security with the changes that they can do. Tenants may not need permission to change the use of their units, but they can still be tied by their own leases set by their own landlords. Next slide, please. So where does this leave us for spatial planning? Well, these are all questions because there is just so much uncertainty ahead. But I think moving forward, there's going to be clearly an increased demand for private spaces, and I deliberately end with a picture of the development of Manchester city centre. It will be harder for policymakers to entice more people to the city centre, and no more so than Manchester, which has very few high-quality public open spaces within the city centre. I'm not really sure whether communal spaces within these buildings are likely to assuage the demand for private COVID-secure spaces. There probably will be calls for increased democratisation of the planning system. People want to have a say at how their spaces are closed up. Will they want to have a cycle lane in the area? Will they want the area to be for cafes? But then that leads on to tensions, because you've got a tension between the hospitality industry and local residents, which has particularly taken place in Ancoats recently, with regards to provision of outdoor seating for local cafes and restaurants. And obviously the issues for public open space contributions have been around for years, but how will cash-strapped local authorities raise cash for improvements at a time when the government's also consulting on changes to raising the thresholds for affordable housing contribution? And finally, just kind of jumping on what Jen was saying, could they see the resurgence of kind of district neighbourhood centres at the expense of larger city centres, particularly for offices in these areas? And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for that presentation, Tom. I'll be now moving on to speak about the proposals at Leeds Bradford Airport, which seek to create a sustainable future. Next slide, please. So just a bit of background on Leeds Bradford Airport itself. It currently gives poor passenger experience with congestion at peak times, long waiting periods for baggage, a limited food and beverage offer in the departure lounge, and the building itself is old, outdated, long and narrow. This poor passenger experience leads to passenger leakage to other regional airports, most notably Manchester along the M62. It's estimated that almost 25% of domestic passengers travel from the Leeds City region to Manchester Airport, which is neither environmentally or economically sustainable. There is a clear need at Leeds Bradford Airport to increase passenger handling capacity. The airport has been subject to recent proposals for extensions, but none of which were capable of delivering the change in passenger improvements, and this has now just led to piecemeal development. An application was submitted in April this year to Leeds City Council with the objective of creating an airport with environmental integrity. The proposals include a new BREEAM Excellent terminal building, extend the daytime flight hours to 6 AM to 11:30 PM, a new bus terminal, highway works, airside changes and off-site biodiversity improvements. Improving the airport's operations and developing a more attractive passenger offer, increasing flight options will help to redress the current outflow and claw back passengers, enabling local people to use their local airport as opposed to travelling out of the region to Manchester. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has had a catastrophic impact all over the world and within many sectors, aviation being one of the hardest hit. The UK plunged into recession after the COVID outbreak in March, with GDP falling by 20.4%, which is the biggest quarterly decline since records began in 1955. This is the deepest decline of any G7 nations. Although traffic is starting to recover in many regions of the world, much of the global aviation fleet remains grounded, and current traffic volumes represent only a small proportion of normal activity levels. Increased working from home has reduced the need for some to travel internationally for work, as people are now beginning to realise many meetings can be done on digital platforms such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and they no longer need to travel abroad. The Leeds Bradford Airport proposals seek to increase passenger growth to 7 million passengers per annum by 2030, in line with the UK aviation forecasts. But due to COVID-19, this passenger growth is now expected to be reached 2 years later than originally envisaged. This is only a short delay and shows that the aviation sector is expected to bounce back from the pandemic. Next slide, please. As we began to emerge out of lockdown, which feels like many moons ago, the government's announcements have made clear the vital role that infrastructure will play in supporting the UK's economic recovery and the ambition to build back better, greener and faster and level up the English towns, cities and regions. The aviation industry has demonstrated resilience to major shock events in the past, such as 9/11 and the global financial crisis, and it is assumed that the medium-term impact of the pandemic on UK aviation market demand will be a delay of 2 to 4 years compared to previous expectations. In terms of Leeds Bradford Airport, it is expected that traffic will exceed 2019 levels by 2022, reflecting a 2-year delay. The proposed new terminal building will help spearhead recovery for Leeds and the wider city region by bringing significant job growth with better access to these jobs through the new and improved public transport facilities. With environmental integrity at the forefront of the terminal building, the building itself will be a world-class terminal being BREEAM Excellent, as well as the airport's ground operations, which seek to achieve net zero by 2023. Although some way off, this state-of-the-art terminal will enable Leeds to be ready for the cleaner, quieter and more efficient fleet of aircraft in the future. If the proposals are refused, Leeds could be left behind and stuck with an old, outdated, inefficient terminal building whereby passengers continue to travel outside of the city to Manchester for better facilities. Although the Leeds Bradford Airport proposals do not classify a nationally significant infrastructure project as set out in the 2008 Planning Act, Section 35 of the Act provides a mechanism for projects which don't meet those thresholds to be classed as nationally significant. The Section 35 process has been underused in the past because of the difficulties which smaller projects have in claiming national significance, but the direction enables projects to take advantage of the benefits of the development consent order process and could play an important role in the future in supporting the delivery of new infrastructure within towns and cities post-COVID. Smaller projects such as transport schemes with business cases focused on local benefits could now take on a wider significance and contribute to the ongoing economic recovery in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That was great. So hi, yeah, I'm Rachael. I'm from Arup. I'm going to talk about a project that I've recently worked on, which has contributed towards creating an inclusive and resilient future for Grimsby Town Centre through the consultation work we've done. So this work I was involved in is part of the Towns Fund deal for North East Lincolnshire Council. You want to go to the next slide, please? So the government's 3.6 billion Towns Fund is an opportunity for 100 towns to submit town investment plans to secure investment of up to 25 million for the development of their town centres. This is an opportunity to unleash the full economic potential of these towns and level up communities throughout the country. So Arup and part of has been supporting Grimsby on the development of their town investment plan, and my role on this project was to support on the public and stakeholder engagement, where we engaged on the emerging proposals for the town that would be submitted for funding. Next slide, please. So due to COVID, the only option was to carry out a virtual consultation, and digital teams at Arup, like other companies as well, have developed a really useful tool called Arup Virtual Engage. So Virtual Engage is a 360-degree virtual room where you can present consultation material and other information such as videos for public to engage with. So it's kind of set out like a normal consultation room, town hall style. We ran the consultation for 12 days and it could be accessed 24/7, so people could access it whenever it suited them. As part of this platform, we were able to get Google Analytics data, in which some interesting data came out of it that you wouldn't usually get from a traditional face-to-face consultation. Next slide, please. So during the 12-day consultation, 3,444 people visited the site. We also had a form within the site with consultation questions on, in which we received 438 responses. This was a lot bigger than your standard consultation for a similar consultation, so we were able to reach a much wider audience. 57 of the visitors that came to the site came via links posted on Facebook. 25% by directly clicking on a link to the page, so from mailing lists, etc., and 18% via articles and search engines. So what I found interesting was that actually a lot more people are using social media to engage with consultations, and this really added value to our project as we could understand how people are connecting with consultations and how they're finding out about them. 61% viewed the site on a phone, compared to 23% on a computer and 16% on a tablet. So that shows how accessible it is on the phone and how easy to navigate it is, but also that can be used on multiple devices. It also shows how technology is moving forward and that a lot of these digital consultation platforms should be created to be accessed on the phone, as that's the device that people are mainly using. Next slide, please. Within the consultation question form, respondents could provide a postcode and other demographic data so we could understand who we were engaging with. So this map shows where respondents were mainly based within Greater Grimsby, Cleethorpes, some coming from the wider catchment area and some from further afield. So that was really interesting to understand, as we could know who was actually interested in the development of the town centre and who engages with the town centre. And therefore interested in this consultation. A higher proportion of females, 57% than males, 42% responded with 1% non-binary respondents. And the main age group was 45 to 54 who responded, with the least respondents from the over 75 age category. We did provide hard copies for anyone who could not access the site, for example, for older age groups. So having access to this data from using a digital consultation platform showed us we were able to reach a much wider audience and more people engage with this consultation material than a standard face-to-face consultation. We were also able to gather interesting analytics data that added value to the project and also our future consultations, because it showed who we're engaging with and how they are engaging with these types of consultations. I still think there is value in a traditional face-to-face consultation, as people can ask open questions, you can have open conversations, and you can see the material in person, which is a bit better. But actually this example just shows how, especially in a COVID world, digital consultations can enable a wider audience to be represented and heard, and how future consultations need to adapt to a more digital world. So thank you. Passing on to James.
Cool. Thank you, Rachel. So now that's kind of the end of the presentations, and we've got about half an hour or so of kind of questions and discussion. And we do have also a wider audience from the other committees as well. So if someone from the audience does want to take and ask a question, if you just raise your hand and we can unmute you and bring you into the discussion. And again, if anyone wants a reminder on the slides, I can just move back up and down. So if you want to recap any content. So yeah, so if everyone wants to turn their cameras back on, and we can see if anyone's got any questions or discussions on any of the presentations.
Hi, James, can I start off by saying, wow, you were all absolutely brilliant. And the presentations were just so professional, so well thought through. Each one of you raised issues that perhaps aren't always discussed, but come from a very unique perspective of your own understanding of things and thought. I was just so impressed. So thank you ever so much. My mind is spinning all over the place. I have so many questions that I could probably go on till 10 o'clock, but I won't. I'll let other people ask them. But if I can just make one comment, I thought there was a really interesting theme that came through from everyone. And it was actually the theme about sort of communities and about the importance of communities and about engagement. And you know, I'm a consultation specialist, so I'm geeky. I've written every single bit of that last presentation down in the facts and figures. So, but it was about the importance of working with people and who do we plan for? It's for everybody, for the whole of society. So if I've got a question, if I may, James, just pose the first and then I'll leave it to everyone else. It's about the diversity of input that you get when you consult. So it's about, are we reaching out? Are we really planning for everyone? Who is being left out of this conversation based on your experience of the projects?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm quite keen to understand kind of Rachel's thoughts. You know, when you were going for that kind of digital approach, did you guys kind of think about, okay, if we go for this approach, kind of who are the at-risk groups of not being engaged and kind of being left out?
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely. I mean, obviously the younger age groups and older age groups are ones that don't really tend to engage in consultations anyway. So we were especially conscious that it was digital, that we wouldn't maybe get older age groups. I mean, that's quite a big presumption, but so we did provide hard copies, but actually we only ended up getting a handful back of responses anyway. But it is something that moving forward is still a challenge and is something that we still need to consider, particularly for the younger age group, as the town centre is what they're going to live in when they're older. So actually their voice is really important, but it's still, the data still didn't show that it was reaching them. So it is an interesting point that is needed to be considered further, but I'm not sure how we engage with that younger group.
No, I was also thinking that's really interesting. I was also picking up in terms of the presentations from Tom and from Jen, that you both talked about involving people in the redesign of high streets. And I think Rachel's very effectively there talked about the age range of things, but what about the other forms of diversity? The more difficult to reach groups, the different ethnicity, culture, all of that sort of thing, because everyone uses the high street. I think, I can't remember which one of you it was, made the really key point. High streets and city centres and town centres are local meeting places. They always have been. So they have to be planned for everyone. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I'm happy to go. I mean, Jen, go first.
No,
It's quite fine. I think particularly good question on the diversity and who you include. I think my picture that I showed earlier of Deansgate being pedestrianised, I think shows a real problem of great for cyclists, great for pedestrians walking, navigating that kind of, but then you've got this kind of anti-terror guard that's there, but that's not that's not good for those who aren't able-bodied or are wheelchair-bound, because that is not wide enough for them to go down. And I implore Manchester City Council for being bold and doing that, because it's been talked about for a long, long time. And I agree that this should have happened, but I think that it's not really been talked about who, this was meant to be for social distancing, for making people walk along the street and not have to be next to people and making 2 meter distance. But there hasn't been that chat about, well, who is excluded, and that is a group of people who are, in my mind, excluded straight away and haven't been consulted on that.
Yeah, it's kind of going off what Tom said then about it. It's a really difficult one, and I don't think you'll ever get this specific right answer of how to incorporate everyone. And I think it's an evolving conversation. And I think I've kind of wrote a note down about, was it Rachael who spoke about Grimsby Town Centre? And I think it is looking at what other centres are doing as well. Like I touched on in my presentation, it's about how neighbouring authorities seeing what they've done to bring more different communities in together, and case studies. And I don't think there's enough. It might be a bit of a bold statement to make there, but I think sometimes there's not enough sharing of good practice and what other people have done and what other local authorities or other private sectors have done. So I think it is maybe looking at how probably the private and the public can work together and bring those ideas together as well. I don't know if I'm rambling there, kind of thinking off the top of my head, but I think it's just how we can work together, because I don't think you'll ever get the right answer or the answer on how you do it. It's just how we evolve it going forward.
I think just drawing on what you're saying, Jen, it's about like parties working together and working collaboratively, but there's always going to be a level of compromise, because each party will have kind of a different aim or whatever. Even though it might be the same end goal, they'll still have different interests and things. And it is that level of compromise and what can be reached through discussions and kind of consultation processes and things like that, so everyone's happy.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just knowing where people can go to raise those concerns. I mean, I've had experience in local authorities, for example. People don't understand the system. They'll ring up planning and talking about bins, for example, or they'll, it's just, if people have a genuine concern about the way their cities are being changed, that forum, that citizens forum of asking what to do or how to change it just isn't there. And I think that's the real problem. It's almost become sometimes a bit like tax. It's so complicated. It needs planners to navigate it for you. But if you can't either afford a consultant to explain that to you, or you are, you're not, your English is not your first language, or you're not familiar with the UK planning system, it is a barrier, and you do feel excluded straight away just by virtue. I'm in planning because I have an interest. I've got qualified for it, but most people I speak to on a daily basis still don't know what I do. I've known them for 10 years, and I still have to explain to them what I do. And if I can't, that's the real problem, is that it just doesn't feel as open as it can be to everyone. My experience, really.
No, I completely agree with Tom there, because I'm not a qualified planner. I'm still quite new. So it's why I try and come from the angle that if I'm doing the job and I'm not understanding fully because it's not in plain English, then it's how am I going to explain that to someone who isn't doing it day to day. So, but no, it's an interesting topic.
One thing with consultations as well, obviously I worked on the Leeds Bradford one, and because that's such a significant project for region and Leeds City Council, they decided where the consultation, like the face-to-face consultation, would be held. And with a lot of people who came to the consultation event, they didn't think it was an accessible event, and that it should have been in lots of different places around the region, just so that everybody could come in, rather than one place, that's it, that's all you're getting. But then I think with it being such a significant project, like the digital consultation, that would bring a lot in, because just even on the public access responses, we've had like 4,000 responses. So an actual digital base which just generates all the information for you, it just makes it a lot easier, because I was the lucky one of simming through all the responses and narrowing it down. But I think it's also the council, with a large project like that, they need to work with the community to determine where the best location is, rather than them determine it, just so then it can be accessible for everyone. And again, in local centres, in the town centres, rather than out on the edge of centre.
It's really interesting being someone that works for local authority to hear this different side of it as well, because it's not normally a conversation you get day to day.
Yeah.
So it's really good.
Yeah, I've got to say that I'm just touching on what Tom and Jen said. I think it's the planning system's responsibility to make sure that everybody is engaged. Just an example that I can use locally where I live, there's a planning application down the road from my house, and there's lots of Facebook groups that are in opposition to it, but they've kind of created their own online petition, which has about 1,500 signatures on it that are opposing to the development. But as Tom said, the planning system's so complicated that, the local authority might never actually see that petition and hear those views, and it would only be up to them to actually submit their objections formally through the public access system to have their voices heard. So I think it is also down to the planning system to perhaps be less complex, but maybe the planning system needs more consultation to understand how it can appeal to more people and appeal to everybody, regardless of age or ethnicity or ability, in order to make sure that everybody's voices are heard.
Yeah. So James, back to you, James.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, just to kind of add a point onto that is that what I kind of feel like locally, kind of where I live, so a lot of people only interact with the planning system on a kind of reactive basis rather than proactive. So maybe when they get a consultation letter through the post, and they kind of see like 50 homes going in a couple of fields next door, then that's when people really get quite emotive, and they don't always kind of understand the kind of the evidence based in the process and the kind of planning system behind why that site's moving forward. But straight away, they're kind of reactive. They've got a negative reaction. They've got a negative association with the planning system, and because like, oh, how could the planners have let them get away with this? So I kind of feel like, again, I haven't necessarily got a solution here, but just kind of that kind of communication to the wider public on the actual kind of process, and I guess the local plan system and kind of site allocation, and communicating that process to them, so people can actually understand kind of why the housing is appearing near them. I feel like that's kind of that's really important. I guess kind of following on, it'll be quite interesting. So kind of Rachael, your kind of the digital approach. Let's say I know you were kind of devising, you're working for a strategy, but let's say if you were kind of if it was a statutory consultation as part of a kind of a local plan or a housing development, to what extent is a kind of a full digital approach acceptable, or do you think there's kind of legally, I do kind of wonder, in the kind of legislation is whether there's still that kind of the need for that kind of face-to-face discussion or the consultation. I'm assuming you didn't get any kind of feedback that people were accusing you of having anything to hide or anything like that by taking a digital approach, because I feel like if that was happening for kind of a housing development and people said it's digital only, people might feel a little bit disgruntled that, I don't know, they were hiding from them, or
yeah, we didn't get any feedback like that. I mean, obviously we got feedback where people couldn't use the site, so they got a bit frustrated with it. But in the sense of, would this work for a housing development, I'm not sure, because like you said, people are reactive, not proactive, and this is quite large scale in the sense that it's a town centre that a lot of people have got quite a lot of passion for in Grimsby, which is great, but it's also really a lot of money that could make a lot of difference. So I think people really felt like they had a chance to say their point of view, whereas I think in a housing development, people would only respond if it was, like you said, near them, and whether digital consultation would be effective for that, I'm not sure. I think it'd be better, like you said, in person, whether you can engage with the material face to face and have those open conversations because they want to know the ins and outs rather than just the face value.
Was there opportunities to have that two-way conversation, or was it just they'd log on, this is the information, and then you submit that feedback form?
Yeah, we did provide contact with the council if they wanted to have further discussions, but a couple of people done that, but that was about it. There was also a phone number as well if people could call, but it was mainly just they could spend as much time as they wanted on this platform, but you didn't engage with anyone in particular.
Is this not somewhere where local centres could get involved if it's a virtual thing and people could visit? Obviously, maybe not during COVID and social distancing, but just coming from like what we're saying, like a community's point of view, and that was something like local authorities could get involved with and bring. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's down to money, and local authorities don't think have the money to do that. So I think you're right, and I think James and Rachel raised an important debate about, should you wait for a big housing project for 400 houses? Should you wait until face to face? Well, we could be under these arrangements for 6 months. We need to work. We need to plough ahead, and obviously we need to build a country. We shouldn't be using this opportunity to just plough things ahead and do stuff. But at the same time, there are things out there, such as the digital engagement process, which actually, as Rachel says, can actually go further. I think there was an EIP in South Oxfordshire which got 800 people. You don't find 800 people clamoring to go to an EIP, to watch it. So it shows that once you get the right process, you can actually get people there. I think it's not a workaround. You're going to get people who are going to be annoyed that they're not consulted first, but we've got an economy to restart really, and I think we've got to find a way to go around it. I think at the moment this digital aspect not only has the benefit of going above and beyond what we normally do, but people may be put off by going and visiting in person. They don't want to seem to be have that awkward conversations face to face with someone. Oh, what do you think of development? Sometimes people don't want to ask that question. They want to go there and visualize that they can do it in their own space, their own time. And I think that there's a lot of benefits to that. So yeah, I think it's just, unfortunately, it's just that balance. I think people have got to realise that we're in a situation which could last for at least 6 months, where we can't actually do any of this. But that just should not mean that we're stopping, everyone's life for that reason.
And then another thing that I was quite keen to get people's thoughts on was on kind of Jennifer's presentation, just what people think about the role of the city centre is going forwards. Because I've not visited the city centre for quite a while. Maybe we popped into Leeds city centre a couple of times. I live out in suburbia. I know kind of, Rachel, you live in the city centre in Leeds, and you kind of said, you've noticed it change quite significantly. I just kind of wonder, how people think that kind of power balance is going to is it going to change between those kind of city centres and centralised kind of activities towards maybe more empowering the kind of the town centres and kind of distributing the economic activity kind of around the region rather than kind of having that centralised approach? So I don't know if kind of, Rachel, what your kind of first-hand observations were of kind of Leeds city centre, kind of. I mean, have you noticed quite a significant drop in kind of economic activity, foot traffic?
I think definitely at the beginning, but recently not so much. I mean, all I'm doing is walking around. I don't know what the restaurants and shops are, but they all seem relatively busy. But I think, building on what Jennifer said, I think local centres definitely have a strong role to play now moving forward, because people don't feel comfortable coming into the city centre. They have to travel, use public transport, and actually, if they can just walk around the corner to their local hub that has everything that they need, then it actually provides more accessibility. And it's the point of going back to everything else that we've said, that it helps people feel like they can still play a part in their area rather than come into the city centre to get all their jobs done. And I think I overheard a conversation when I was in a shop the other day, and a woman said that she can't just come into the city centre to quickly run around and do her jobs anymore. So it's actually the role of city centre, maybe that's coming as more of an experience instead of people just popping in to quickly pick up some shops. And that's maybe the role of a local centre, and then the city centre is you come, you have food, you go to the cinema or whatnot. And it's more of an experience role rather than a convenience role.
Yeah, I think that. Oh, sorry, go on, Jennifer.
No, sorry. It was just saying, I'm really glad you said that. Like, the point's got across. It is like distinguishing between the cities, the town centres, and local centres about what actually. So I'm really glad that came across. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think city centres will always play a key role, but it's just going to be a lot different than what there was before. It used to be like offices, big office developments, but now, as Rachael said, it's more the experience, and this is where the class years come in. It's more flexibility for people, developers, just to move with the times and keep up with the change and just be flexible. But yeah, I think local centres will definitely be more important to people in a sense. They might feel a bit more comfortable and safe, whereas in a city centre there's so many people, so it can be so crowded sometimes, like Christmas shopping or whatever, so people might feel a bit more comfortable in their own local centre.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when Amy and I in the committee were trying to think of a topic for this presentation, we all kind of discussed how we'd experienced lockdown, and Amy said that she hadn't been to Manchester city centre in months, and I hadn't been either. And I think it is about necessity. The only reason why I go to Manchester is because my office is there. And without the need to physically be in my office, I don't need the city centre anymore. And I suppose I have depended a lot more on my local centre. And from what I could see, it has thrived during lockdown and COVID. There's been lots of new pop-up shops, and it goes back to what we were saying before about this kind of community feel. And I think maybe a pandemic had to happen in order for the community feel to come back into my local centre. But it's definitely changed, and I suppose in one way you'd kind of hope that it stays this way. You know, everyone talks about the death of the high street, but maybe the pandemic has kind of gone some way to reverse that in local centres.
Yeah, I can, following on from, sorry, Sue, just following on from you, Liv, but yeah, I mean, I didn't leave, the area for a good couple of months, and now my first port of call is always going to the local centre for food, and then I've only been into Manchester once, and that was just because I couldn't get what I wanted from the local centre, and I probably won't go in now for a couple of weeks again. And to be honest, I haven't missed it, which is that's the key thing, I think, because I know that I can't get at this moment, I can't actually get anything more from the city centre that I can get from just down the road, and it's serving me really well. I live in quite a suburban area, so there's more green space here, which Manchester is well known for not having the best open space or public space and things like that. So for me, I just think, well, actually, it could potentially be more of a rebirth of suburbia. I think a lot of city centre people might see this and be actually there's more value in having open space, especially after the lockdown and things like that.
I think it's as well looking at city centres and how, I know when I've had a few meetings and I spoke to a developer who was living in a one-bed flat in Manchester, and he had no balcony. It was really difficult for him, with no open space around him. So it's kind of like looking at what Tom was saying as well about that flexible new way of building and designing something as well. Because I know I live in like a really countryside part of Wigan with like horses up the road. It's definitely far from the city way of life. So for me, I've never experienced that. So it's definitely something. And I think that's where with town centres you can look at bringing in that affordable living into the centre of it as well, or around the outskirts as well, where you've got that incorporation of living, green space and retail too.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I live in a flat with no balcony in the city centre, with no green space around. So yeah, it's tricky, and you find you end up driving out to green spaces when ideally they'd just be on your doorstep. So we're already thinking of what role does the city centre play for us, because especially if you're not going into the office, like Olivia said, I don't need to be here anymore really. So I think there is definitely going to be a trend moving out to the suburbs, and the role that plays will definitely be a lot stronger going forward.
Yeah. But I guess it comes back to my point about people being reactive to the planning system, because if the planning system responds to that and the people who are already in suburbia, they don't want more people coming to suburbia. We just keep staying in city centres. So I guess, and then you've got obviously a lot more brownfield land in those kind of more urban areas. So, you know, if there is a kind of growing demand for people to kind of live less dense and spread out more, can we, you know, does the kind of planning system respond to that? And does it need to consider, you know, releasing more land out in those kind of more urban areas to respond to that kind of demand? Because at the moment, you know, there probably isn't that sufficient capacity to maybe accommodate. But if that is going to be a long-term trend, is there enough capacity? Yeah, not sure.
You kind of do want new people coming into somewhere. I mean, just looking at it more from like a housing point of view, you do try and make housing for the local people and make sure you're retaining, you know, the people that live there, and you can work in Wigan, live in Wigan. But it's also important you are getting that small percentage or that corporation of people coming who aren't in Wigan, coming in to bringing that new business, bringing that new ideas and money, and kind of like starting the new. It's getting that balance. When you, especially when you're creating like such large housing development, they tend to create a community of their own. So it is working how you get that balance between new people coming in and making sure you're working for the local people already. Not a simple solution.
I think a lot of it is like, I think we're quite entitled as a country. You know, every Englishman has his castle. You know, we all have house, garden, garage, and a dog. You know, we want to have that space to have that life, but I think we've all got to be realistic. In 20 years' time, that is just not going to be possible. You know, we need to look at places like how Europe, which has obviously large countries like France and Germany, their footprints, their cities are significantly smaller than ours. We've got quite a particular place like London, enormous footprint for the people that are there, albeit it is a big city. But you know, you look at someone like Barcelona, where you know it's just so well modelled in terms of how people are living much more higher density. And I think it's just down to trends and perceptions. People want to have that suburban lifestyle in this country, and until people don't have that, the market builds what people want. If people don't want that anymore, they'll stop doing that. They'll build flats. Obviously, there's a trend for flats, but you know, there's you know, that's the biggest issue, is demand. You know, there's no point saying, oh, we're not going to build those houses, but actually, that's what people want to buy. And that's the biggest tension, isn't it?
Yeah, just to pick up on that, if I may. The market builds what people want. Do you remember Henry Ford, who invented the Ford motor cars? He said, if you ask people what they want, you know, which color they want, they'd just say black. Or if you ask them before he invented the motor car, what type of vehicle would you like? And they'd just say a faster horse. Because until you actually give people that vision, it's very, very hard for anyone to sort of imagine what the future might be like. And I don't know about you, but if I go back 10 years and I now think about, you know, what I can pick up in my hand here, my sort of walking computer, 10, 15 years ago, probably when you were still quite young, we didn't have anything like this. But would anyone take it off me now? No. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, really is for us as planners to not just, when we talk about respond, I think it's much more reflect and learn about what maybe hasn't been right, and think about what we can put in place to try and address that. But the big challenge is actually staying ahead of the curve, because actually we don't know. It's a bit like a wave. You don't know quite when that crest is going to break and what's going to flow from it. But the decisions that we take and that you're taking as planners now are going to outlive you. They'll outlive your children. They'll outlive your children's children. And if they're the right decision, in 1,000 years, everyone will be putting them up on a slide in a lecture theatre saying, now look at the way this was planned. So if I can sort of just put a question to you, what would be the one thing that you would really like, with your visionary crystal ball and everything like that, to change? and do differently going forward and leave as your legacy? Tough question.
That is hard.
But it's reflecting on your experiences probably now and what we've learned. What has come out that you would like to change?
For me, and I don't know if, oh sorry, like how relevant this is, kind of get rid of that stigma of the affordable. I am kind of like banging the drum for affordable housing here because it is what I do. But just getting rid of that stigma of when people see affordable housing as being that one that kind of shove at the other side of an estate, and bringing in the mixed communities where it's not, you don't even think about the different tenures, or it's indestructible to each other. So just try that. I don't know if you ever will, but you can try.
Love it.
It's a good point. It is a really good point, because I did my dissertation on mixed tenure developments, and the issue about tenure blind and pepper potting. Yeah, it's just not. I did it on the estate in my hometown, Oxford, and where clearly the estate just parked social and affordable housing on one side. It's so obvious, and it's like it created animosity. So yes, I completely agree with that. Like, from my own experience, that was an eye-opening experience actually when I was going around.
Yeah, it's getting rid of that phrase, well, if I work hard, why would I want to live in front of a smaller house, or someone that's in a low-cost home and I can afford to buy it outright, sort of thing.
Really like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do as well, Jen. What you said there is brilliant. I completely agree. And just going on as well a bit about council houses as well, and how, you know, that there was that stigma, maybe there still is a stigma, but how, you know, these new developments that are award-winning, that are coming forward, you know, great sustainable developments, and how that's, you know, you can just see how much of a difference and how much of a leap forward that we've actually taken through the years, which is just brilliant.
Definitely.
I think from my perspective, because I'm a transport planner, so for me, something that I'd love to change is just the reliance on everyone working in one place, so like a city centre, and everyone getting in at 9 o'clock and then maybe that's 5:30 or 5, and just the involving those 9 to 5 traditionals kind of rut that we're all kind of stuck in. And we know, you can see it now that the kind of lockdown has kind of changed that to some extent. We've seen how we've massively benefited from that in terms of our city centres and being able to redistribute or rebalance kind of road space towards the other uses. Now, kind of unfortunately, as those measures were kind of pulled away, you know, we saw the road traffic coming back up again, congestion during peak times. So I think for me, what I'd kind of love to see is just that kind of just a change in those habits between people feeling like they need to everyone needs to go to the one place at a certain time and then come back again, and you know, all the kind of congestion and the amount of infrastructure it requires, because you know, it really would give us an opportunity to kind of reimagine our spaces if we weren't set by those kind of traditional kind of rules almost.
Yeah, I think just touching on what James said, we've had a comment from a member on our committee, and we're quite big on sustainable transport in our committee, and just the introduction of new cycle lanes in Manchester has been such a significant improvement, and that has probably only happened because of the pandemic. And I know Ian cycles and I cycle as well, and just having choice and how you can move around the city centre that isn't either by a train or by tram, but just being able to cycle somewhere and experience places differently has been such a significant change in the city centre. So I think if that's something that we can learn from, then hopefully we can expand that across different cities and, you know, expand the network in Greater Manchester, and hopefully that will be a positive outcome from the pandemic.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think I'd like to see that as well, and also more on how more on accessibility in terms of how everyone can access and have opportunities from all backgrounds, from what we touched on before, things like access to just simple green space or jobs, and access to cycle lanes, and how that can be provided for everyone and not just for certain types of groups, so more diversity and accessibility.
Cool. Was there any more thoughts on that? Because I think we are nearing the kind of the end of the allotted time, so don't know if anyone else had any kind of final thoughts or questions or any kind of final words to sign off. So I mean, if not, I mean, I want to just kind of say thank you, I guess, to everyone for presenting, for the members of the audience attending, and obviously Sue Manns for your time as well. It's been a pleasure having you, and yeah, thank you everyone for the insightful discussion at the end.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you, James, for chairing, and thank you, everybody. I could stay on for another 2 hours. You probably couldn't. But it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much. And I'd love to meet up with you all in person at some point. So until then, stay safe and keep thinking into the future and planning in the way you are. It's brilliant.